Hello, everyone, and welcome back to our virtual Mishnah Berurah. Here we're holding Mishnah Berurah Chelik Beis, and Mir Hashem, today we will complete Nun Hey Amid Beis, and I hope to some of Nun Vav Amid Aleph as well. We are continuing to learn halachos Netillas Yadayim, and we started a brand new Siman yesterday. We began Siman Kuf Samach Aleph, which discusses the halachos of chatzitzah. Those are interpositions between your hands and the water that you're using to wash the Netillas Yadayim. When is the chatzitzah a problem? When is the chatzitzah not a problem? So we learned yesterday the Mishnah Berurah's hakdama to this siman, and we began to discuss the halachos of chatzitzas. Let's just remind ourselves, we spoke about three different types of chatzitzas. We spoke about a chatzitzah midaraisa and two derabanans, two chatzitzahs midarabanan. So midaraisa, in order for something to be considered a chatzitzah, you need two variables. You need roiv or makpid. So when it comes to the question of the Netillas Yadayim, in order for a chatzitzah to be a chatzitzah midaraisa, it has to cover roiv, the majority of the surface of the hand that needs to be washed, the part of the hand that needs to be washed. So you need roiv and you need makpid. It has to be that the chatzitzah, the item that's forming the chatzitzah, let's say dirt or something else, is something that you're makpid on. It's something that you want to remove. You don't want it to be on your hands. So if you have both of those variables, if you have roiv u makpid, that's a chatzitzah midaraisa. Midrabanan, we consider a chatzitzah anytime that you have one of the two variables. So midrabanan, if you have roiv, even if the thing that's making up the chatzitzah is something that you're not makpid on, it's something that you don't mind if it's there, but since you have roiv, which is one of the variables that make a chatzitzah midaraisa, that already would be a chatzitzah midrabanan. So roiv ve'enoi makpid is a chatzitzah midrabanan. So too, if you have makpid, but you don't have roiv, you only have miut. So miut umakpid, if you have only a minority portion of the hand, is being covered with the davar achoitzetz, with the thing that's forming the chatzitzah, but it's something that you're makpid on, it's something that you don't want to be there, so that would also be a chatzitzah. So the three chatzitzahs are roiv umakpid, roiv ve'enoi makpid, and miut umakpid. Any one of those scenarios gives us a problematic chatzitzah when it comes to the Netillas Yadayim. So now, let's just turn back to Nun Hey Amid Aleph, and we'll read the Mechaber from the beginning of the Siman, just for context and continuity. So the Mechaber said, Tzarech lizar mechatzitza, we have to take great care not to have a chatzitzah. And again, we learned yesterday in the Mishnah Berurah that when the Mechaber says tzarech lizaher mechatzitza, that we have to be careful that we shouldn't have a chatzitzah. What that means is that lechatchila, before you go ahead to wash the Netillas Yadayim, you should inspect your hands to see if there are any chatzitzas on the hands. And if there are, you should see to it to remove them. That's what it means, tzarech lizaher, that you have to take care that there should not be a chatzitzah. Inspect your hands and make sure that there are no chatzitzas. We also learned yesterday that if somebody washed Netillas Yadayim, and now after having washed Netillas Yadayim, he discovers a chatzitzah on his hands, a problematic chatzitzah, he could be toila lekula, he could assume that the chatzitzah came to his hands after he already washed Netillas Yadayim. Now, excuse me, continues the Mechaber. So tzarech lizar mechatzitza, why? Shekol davar shechoitzeitz b'tfila, because anything that would constitute a chatzitza, when we discuss tfilas haguf, when somebody's toveling himself in a mikveh for tahara, choitzeitz b'netila, any type of chatzitza that constitutes a chatzitza, but again to the halachos of tfilas kalaguf, is also a chatzitzah when it comes to the Netillas Yadayim, because even though Netillas Yadayim is only a din rabbanon, called the tikkun rabbanon kein daraisa tikkun. When the Chazal make a takana, they follow the template of the din daraisa. So all of these three chatzitzas that we're discussing, roiv umakbid, roiv ve'ena makbid, miut umakbid, these are all chatzitzas when it comes to the halachos of tefillas haguf. So they would also be chatzitzas when it comes to Netillas Yadayim. Turning the page to Nun Hayim Beis, continues the Mechaber, and now the Mechaber gives us a few examples of chatzitzas. Says the Mechaber Kigoin, for example, tsoya shetachas atziporen. Now, the word tsoya literally means excrement, but we're not using the word tsoya over here to mean excrement. We're using it just to mean dirt. Tsoya shetachas atziporen. Dirt that's under the fingernails, shaloi kineged habasar, where it's not lined up with the basar, with the actual flesh of the fingertip. What does that mean? Well, if you take a look at your nails, what you'll realize is that the nail grows, the nail grows out from the fingertip. Up to a certain point, the tip of the nail is level with the flesh of the fingertip itself. And dirt could get in to that crevice over there, where that dirt is kind of sandwiched between the fingernail and the fingertip. That's called kineged habasar. That's dirt that is literally, kineged means opposite. It's level with the basar. It's between the basar of the fingertip and the fingernail. But if you allow the fingernail to grow further out, so now the fingernail extends beyond the fingertip, that's called tsaya, that's shaloi kineged habasar. That's not next to the flesh of the fingertip anymore. That's beyond the level of the fingertip. So the Mechaber says over here, when is dirt under the fingernail a problem? Dirt that's under the fingernail, shaloi kineged habasar. If it's not kineged habasar, if it's under the fingernail, beyond the tip of the finger itself. Now, let's realize, when we're talking about dirt under a fingernail, obviously we're talking about something that's a miut. Obviously that only covers a very, very, very minor portion of the area of your hand that you have to wash with Netillas Yadayim. So we're talking about a chatzitzah which is miut. It only covers a minority of the area that has to be washed. But the Mechaber is telling me dirt that's under the fingernail, that shaloi kineged habasar, dirt that's under the fingernail where the fingernail protrudes beyond the fingertip itself, that's makpid. That's dirt that people are normally makpid, that when they clean their hands, they want to clean that dirt away. Dirt that's kineged habasar, dirt that's all the way down in the crevice between the fingernail and the fingertip, that's not makpid. People are not makpid all the time to always be sitting with a nail file or a device and cleaning out the dirt under the fingernails. Only somebody who's OCD. But that's the dirt that's kineged habasar. If it's not kineged habasar, that's something that people are makpid on. So that would be miut umakpid, that's a chatzitzah. Miut ve'enoi makpid, the dirt that's in the crevice, that's miut ve'enoi makpid, that's not a problem. That's why the Mechaber says here, what's a chatzitzah that is problematic? The dirt under the fingernail, where the fingernail protrudes beyond the fingertip. Continues the Mechaber, ubatzek shetachas atziporen, or dough that's under the fingernail, afilu kineged habasar. Let's say a woman goes ahead and she needs dough for challah, and the dough gets into her fingernails, and it gets all the way down under the fingernails, even into the crevice between the fingernail and the fingertip. Now, we just said that soya, dirt that's in that crevice, is not a problem, because that's miut ve'enoi makpid. But dough, that's already a foreign substance. The dirt that gets in there is not really a foreign substance. That's naturally occurring. That's sweat and dirt that builds up. That a person is not necessarily makpid on. But when somebody goes and kneads dough, and now they go to wash their hands, they want to get rid of all the dough. So even the dough that's in the crevice, they want to get rid of. So batzek is already miyutu makpid, even if it's keneged abasa. Continues the Mechaber. Uritia, a bandage, sha'al b'saroi, that's on his flesh. Now, the halacha of a bandage is an interesting halacha, and we'll have to get into the details of that in the Mishnah Berurah. In the meantime, let's go weiter in the Mechaber. The tit hayavein. Tit hayavein, the Mishnah Berurah says, is mud that comes from a pit. So it's not like regular mud that you'll find in your backyard. It seems that this tit hayavein is a particularly dense and sticky type of mud. What I've seen brought down is that this is mud that builds up in a mud pit. It builds up over time, so it's kind of like aged mud. This is serious mud. And that's mud that's very dense and very sticky. So the tit hayavein, if you have tit hayavein on your hand, even if it's only on a small portion of the hand, that is miyut umakpid. And the significance of the fact that it's tit hayavein is that it's very sticky and very dense, and therefore water doesn't penetrate it. There could be types of mud that are, obviously mud is water soluble, it's water based, and if it's thin mud, then we say that when you pour the Netillas Yadayim water over your hand and over the mud, the Netillas Yadayim water actually could penetrate the mud, but not so by tit hayavein. Tit hayavein is kind of tarti l'reisa. It has a double whammy of problems. It's very dense, so the water doesn't penetrate, and it's very sticky, so it really sticks to the hand and blocks the water from getting through. Further, v'tit hayotzrim, and also the type of mud that pottery makers use. So when you make earthenware kalim, you could picture in your mind the picture of the pottery maker with the pottery wheel working with the clay, which essentially is a type of mud. So tit hayotzrim is also very dense and very sticky. So here the Mechaber has given me a whole list here of examples of chatzitzahs that are bona fide chatzitzahs and would really be a problem. Now, says the Mechaber, Aval b'miyutay she'enoi makpid. All of these examples that we just gave, we're assuming that they're miyut. We're assuming that they're only covering a small portion of the hand. But they all constitute problematic chatzitzahs because they're miyut umakpid. Even though they're only a miyut, but they're makpid. The person wants it off his hands, and therefore midrabanan that constitutes a real chatzitzah. Now, says the Mechaber, Avo b'miyutay she'enoi makpid. But if somebody has some kind of a chatzitzah on his hand, and it's only on a small part of the hand, and it's enoi makpid, he doesn't care about it. He doesn't mind if it stays there, ein lachush. That does not constitute a chatzitzah, and you don't have to be worried about such a chatzitzah. Okay, so now we saw quite a bit of Mechaber. Now let's take a look here at the Mishnah Berurah. The Mishnah Berurah and the Mechaber that we just read will take us through most of Nun Hey Amid Beis. We're up to Mishnah Berurah's cut Beis. Says the Mishnah Berurah, Tzayish atachas hatziparin, dirt that's under the fingernail, hainu zuamas hatziparnayim. This is referring to the dirt that builds up under the fingernails. Shederech lihi kavetz sham. It's the normal derech for dirt to build up over there. Aval tzaya mamish. But if we were talking about real tzaya, excrement, aval tzaya mamish, afilu kineged abasar. The Mechaber said that the natural dirt that builds up under the fingernail, so if it's kineged abasar, if it's all the way in the crevice between the fingertip and the fingernail, that the Mechaber said is not a problem. Why? Because that's miyut ve'enoi makbid. Says the Mishnah Berurah, realize that if we were talking about real tzoya, if we were talking about excrement, then says the Chavetz Chaim, aval tzoya mamish, afilu kineged abasar mistabra shaloi chashiv netila im mitzay shenishar sham. If somebody had real tzoya, even if it was all the way in the crevice between the fingernail and the flesh, so it's kineged abasar, that would be a problem. Why? Because that's a miyut umakbid. The regular dirt, the natural occurring dirt that builds up under the fingernails, if it's kineged abasar, that's miyut ve'enoi makbid. But excrement, that would be miyut umakbid. So that would be a real problem. Ois cotton gimel, shaloi kineged abasar. When is the dirt problematic? If it's under the nail, where the nail protrudes beyond the fingernail. And now the Mishnah Berurah spells this out. Kigoyin, for example, imatzi pyrin gadol, if the nail is long, va'oidif al basar ha'etzba, and it protrudes beyond the actual fingertip. Va'atzoya sheyesham, and the dirt that's there under the fingernail, takas oidif zeh, is under the part of the fingernail that protrudes beyond the fingertip. Derech roiv b'nei adam lahakbid lanakaisa mishum mius. That already is the derech of most people to be makbid on that dirt. And they're makbid to wash that dirt off. Mishum hachi chatzitzah. And that's why it's considered a chatzitzah, because that's miyut makbid. V'tzarech lahaser oisa hazua malkeidem anetila. So that dirt has to be removed before Netillas Yadayim. Ubibatzek, when it comes to dough, which was the next example of the Mechaber, by dough the Mechaber said that's a problem even if it's kineged abasar. Ubibatzek derech b'nei adam lahakbid afilu neged abasar. Says the Mishnah Berurah, that's because when it comes to a foreign substance like dough, there people are usually makbid even if it's kineged abasar. So even kineged abasar is miyut makbid. If you take a look at Hilchas Tefillah in Yardei Kutzad Ches, the Mechaber lists a greater list of things that are considered chatzitzahs. Ella the Poi Chashiv Dvarim Hamitzuyim. Over here, the Mechaber is only mentioning things that are common in the context of the Netillas Yadayim. The Kosav Eli Rabbah b'Shem Sefer Chasidim. The Eli Rabbah brings down the Sefer Chasidim, who writes the Nachon Mitam Zeh, that because of this issue of Netillas Yadayim and problematic dirt under the fingernails, shaloi kineged abasar, the Nachon Mitam Zeh shaloi yigadil adam es tziparnav, that for this reason people should not have long fingernails. Keep your fingernails short and don't get yourself into shilas with Netillas Yadayim. Ois cotton dalid, another example that the Mechaber gave was a retia, a bandage, uretia. Hu mashen noistim chelev oidoinag. This is talking about a bandage where they used to put over a wound, they would put a salve made out of fat, that's chelev, oidoinag. Now, I just have to tell you, because to me it's kind of funny. It's really, you don't know whether to laugh or cry. I don't know if it should be funny or it's like really not funny. But I'm looking at this word, doinag, and I'm saying to myself, boy, that word doinag, it sounds so familiar, but I can't place it. And I don't know what it means. What does this word doinag mean? Trying to remember, what does doinag mean and why is it familiar to me? And I'm thinking, I know that word from somewhere, but I can't remember. So I called up my brother, and I asked my brother, Dainag, Dalid Vav Nun Gimel, what's Dainag? So he's thinking, he says, Dainag. Wait a second, that's a pasuk. I'm saying it's a pasuk. He says, yeah. Harim kadoinag namasu. I'm like, Harim kadoinag namasu. Boy, that sounds familiar, but I just can't place it. And both of us are thinking, and then, wait a second. The third kapitel of L'chuna Ranina. We say it every week, Friday night, Kabbalah Shabbos. We say Kabbalah Shabbos. In the kapitel of Hashem Malach Togel Aretz Yismachu Iyim Rabim, Anon Varafal Sevivav Tzedek Umishpat Mechon Kisai, Eish lefanav telech usalahit saviv tzarav heiru v'rakav tevel rasav atachel la'aretz harim kadoinag namasu milifnei Hashem milifnei Adon kol haaretz. What does it mean? It means harim kadoinag namasu, mountains will melt like wax. Milifnei Hashem, from before the Shechina, milifnei Adon kol haaretz, from before the master of the entire world. So I told my brother, I said, it reminds me of many years ago when I was a young bacher in yeshiva, and I was learning Masechtas Tainus on my own during one of the starim, and I don't remember what the word was, but I came up against a word that I didn't know the taich of. So I went to my Rebbe and I asked my Rebbe what the taich of the word was, and he looks at me and he says, Yisrael, I'm surprised. We say that word in davening all the time. And I said, we say that word in davening all the time? Now I really feel dumb. He says, yeah, we say it in davening all the time. I'm scratching my head. I'm trying to think, where do we say that word in davening? So I looked at him and I said, I don't know where we say that word in davening. So he says, I'm not going to tell you, because if I tell you, you'll be embarrassed. Sit down and think about it. So I sat down and I thought about it. I came back, I said, I'm sorry, but I'm coming up blank. I don't know where we say this word in davening all the time. So he grabbed a siddur and he opened up the siddur and he turned to Hishanis and he showed me the word in Hishanis. And I said, Rebbe, we say it in davening all the time? So he said, yeah, once a year. But here it's Kabbalah Shabbos, it's every Friday night. And I'm looking and I'm scratching my head. But in any case, Nachzor Le'inyonenu. So I cut down here in the Mishnah Berurah. The Mechaber said that a retiyah, a bandage, could be a problematic chatzitzah. Says the Mishnah Berurah, what's a retiyah? This is a shmata, a bandage, that you put fat or wax, or sha'or dvar meshicha, or something else, a salve that you spread out, al smartut, on a bandage, lahaniach al ha'ke'ev, to put on something that is causing you pain. So this was a type of bandage where sometimes they would put a salve on a bandage and then put it over something on the skin, a skin affliction that was causing discomfort. What it sounds to me like, there are certain types of afflictions that you'll get where sometimes if you just take some Vaseline and you just put some Vaseline on it to cover it up so that it's not exposed to the air, or maybe to act as a moisturizer, that already takes away the problem. It takes away the pain. So that's what this retiyah is. This retiyah is a bandage where you're just putting some fat or some wax, which is something that would act like a Vaseline, some kind of an ointment that will just cover it up. And that's what you're doing. That's what you're putting on your hand, lahaniach ala ke'ev, to put on the affliction that's causing you pain. Now, ois cotton hay, the Mechaber said this is a retiyah sha'al b'sarai, that's on the flesh of your hand. Says the Mishnah Berurah, this is problematic. The Mishnah Berurah says, hold it. The Mechaber over here is telling me that a retiyah, a bandage, is a problematic chatzitzah. Says the Mishnah Berurah, hold up, wait a second. After Bavur Kaban B'Sim Kuf Samach Beis Sif Yud, even though we're going to see later on in Sim Kuf Samach Beis Sif Yud, De'ein Tzarech Lital Klal Al Mekayim HaRetiyah, that you don't have to wash the Netillas Yadayim on the part of your hand that has a bandage. Umitam, and the reason is Dekevan She'ena Yachal Lital Ba'isei Makayim, since you cannot wash the part of the hand that has the bandage because you have a wound, let's say, on your hand, and it's bandaged up. Now, you can't wash the area that has the wound because you can't uncover it. Therefore, you don't have to wash it. It's as if, chas v'chalila, somebody had his finger chopped off. If somebody's missing a finger, we don't say he can't wash the Netillas Yadayim because he can't wash that finger. He can't wash that finger because he doesn't have a finger. So he just has to wash the rest of the hand. Now later on in Kuf Samach Beis, we're going to see that the same svara applies to a wound that's covered with a bandage. If you have a wound that's covered with a bandage, since you can't uncover it and you can't wash it, you're not mechuyev to wash it. So it would seem that in Kuf Samach Beis, we're saying you can keep the retia on, and you don't need to wash the Netillas Yadayim over there at all. Over here, the Mechaber is saying the retia is a chatzitzah. Well, that means that what you're telling me is I have to take the bandage off, and I must wash the area of the hand under the bandage. But that's a steer to Kuf Samach Beis. In Kuf Samach Beis, we say we don't even have to wash the area under the bandage. So why can't I just leave the bandage on? Explains the Mishnah Berurah that there's a chilik between Siman Kuf Samach Aleph and Kuf Samach Beis. Says the Mishnah Berurah, Hasam over there in Kuf Samach Beis, haloi mayri b'yesh l'maka. Over there we're talking about somebody who has a wound. Ulakach, and since he has a wound, loy chayshinan sheyaser mekayim aratia, we're not afraid that he's going to take off the bandage while he's eating, v'yiga b'bisarai l'ha'oichlin, and then he'll touch the food with that area that had been covered with the bandage. Why? The koyavle, because it would hurt him. So over there in Kuf Samach Beis, we're talking about somebody who has a wound, and therefore he is not going to uncover his hand while he's eating, because to do so, especially to do so and to touch the food with the part that's wounded and that's covered, it would cause him pain. So over there's no reason to require Netillas Yadayim on the part of the hand that's covered, because it's not going to become uncovered while he's eating. But that's over there in Kuf Samach Beis. Aval Hacha, but over here in Kuf Samach Aleph, Mayri she'ein l'maka. We're not talking about somebody who has a wound. Rak mechush ba'alma b'mokam hanetila. All he has is some kind of discomfort. Over here, we're not talking about somebody who has a wound that's bandaged up. We're talking about somebody who has some kind of a skin affliction, somebody who has some contact dermatitis or something like that. So we put a bandage with some Vaseline on it. But if he wants to, he could uncover his hand during the meal and it won't pain him. It won't be a problem. So by this guy, we need to be afraid that he's going to uncover his hand in the middle of the Suda. If we're afraid that he's going to uncover his hand in the middle of the Suda, then that part of his hand needs the Netillas Yadayim. If that part of his hand needs the Netillas Yadayim, then the chatzitzah that's over it is a bona fide chatzitzah. So again, Aval Hacha, but over here, Mayri, we're talking about a case, she'ein loy maka. This person doesn't have a wound that he can't uncover. Rak mechush ba'alma, he just has some kind of an affliction, b'mokayim hanetila, in part of the hand that needs the Netillas Yadayim. Ve'ein loy tsar min netilasai. And washing is not going to give him any tsar. V'yuchal lahaser haratia masay sheyirtze. And he can take off the bandage whenever he wants. In Cain, if so, yesh lachash sheyaser haratia b'say chasuda. So by him, we have to be afraid that he'll take the bandage off the middle of the suda, v'yiga b'bisarai laha'ichlin, and he'll touch the food with that part of his unwashed hands. And therefore, tzarich lahaser haratia, he has to take off the bandage before the Netillas Yadayim, v'litol yadav, and wash his hands. De'em yitol kisha haratia al yadai, because if he washes while the bandage is on his hand, yeh chatzitzah, it would be a chatzitzah. Now, I'm just going to take a quick peek now, because I didn't look before. I'm curious if in the Dirshu they say anything about a Band-Aid. 1 second. No, I don't see quickly here anything. So, if you would ask me about a Band-Aid, right now, without further research, my answer on a Band-Aid would be, if somebody has a small cut on his finger, and he has a Band-Aid, a little Band-Aid on his finger, it's a miyut ve'ena makbid. People are not makbid on the Band-Aid. People will go to a chasida with a Band-Aid. Why do you have a Band-Aid here? And I cut my finger. So it's a miyut ve'ena makbid. And it's a miyut ve'ena makbid, it's not a chatzitzah. Stay tuned. Okay. Now we go to Mishnah Berurah's Cut and Vav. Another example that the Mechaber gave was Tit Hayavein. Says the Mishnah Berurah, Prirish tit habayrois. Tit hayavein is mud that comes out of a pit. Davi kamay tit hayotzrim. This is similar to the pottery maker's clay. Shehem nidbakim ma'oid. It's very dense and sticky. Umaynim amayim milavay tachteim, and it prevents and seals out any water from getting beneath it. Afil kishem lachim. Even when it's moist, the water does not penetrate it. V'hu adin sha'ar minei tit kishu yavesh v'nidbak babasar. So too any kind of mud that's dried on the skin and stuck to the skin, chatzitzah b'chol zeh, those would be considered chatzitzahs. Bein al gavayad, whether it's on the front, the palm of the hand, bein tachas atzipirin, afilu keneged abasar, or if it's under the fingernails, even keneged abasar, because this would be like butzeik. It's a foreign substance under the fingernails that people are makbid on. Im loy shahayadav mud kolkach, and this is a very important phrase here in the Mishnah Berurah. Im loy shahayadav mud kolkach, unless we're talking about a speck. We're talking about a speck that's so tiny, shein derech b'nei adam la'akbid al zeh, that people aren't makbid on it. Does ein chatzitzah b'chol makom sheyimtzu. Something like that is not a chatzitzah anywhere on the hands. V'hu adin b'tzaya u'batzeik kahai gavna. The same thing would be true of dirt or dough. Kabaysha kasafta b'bir halacha. You don't need to examine your hand with a microscope. You don't need to go and get your magnifying glass and look over your hands, to see maybe I have a speck of dirt on my hand. No. You know why? Because you're not makbid. If it's such a speck, you're not makbid. So then it's miyat ve'ena makbid. Miyat ve'ena makbid does not a chatzitzah make. Now, the Mishnah Berurah gives us another carve-out to the world of chatzitzas, and this is something that we're going to discuss more on Nun Vav Amud Aleph, where we finally get to it. Says the Mishnah Berurah, heicha shemalachtoi betit. Let's say somebody works with mud. He's a pottery maker, or he's a bricklayer. Heicha shemalachtoi betit, kigayna oisalavenim, a bricklayer, or a brick maker. Oikadron, or a pottery maker, somebody who makes earthenware kelim, v'chadayma, or similar such things. Bevadai einay chaitzitz become makom sheyimtzu. By them, the mud is not a chatzitzah no matter where it is on their hand. Kevin she'u manaseh bekach, ve'ena makpid bazeh. Because a pottery maker is not makpid on the clay that's on his hands. It's like a printer. A printer in the olden days, when like 20 years ago, maybe not 20 anymore, maybe 30. A printer, he came into the print shop, the guy wore an apron, and his hands were always black because he was working with ink all day. Maybe before Shabbos, he went there and he gave himself a really, really, really good washing to try to get all the black off his hands. But like this, he has black on his hands all the time. Why is that guy's hands black? Oh, because he's a printer. Oh, okay, now I get it. So a pottery maker or a bricklayer, they're not makpid on this mud that's on their hands. They can't be makpid. They have it on their hands all the time. Like we'll see on the Vav Amud Aleph in Sif Beis. Unless it's covering roiv of their hands. If it's covering roiv of their hands, so then it's ruba ve'enai makpid. Ruba ve'enai makpid is a chatzitzah. Remember, midaraisa, ruba umakpid. Midarabanan, ruba ve'enai makpid, or miut umakpid. So a bricklayer, if he has a small amount of mud or cement on his hand, miut ve'enai makpid. A normal person, it would be miut umakpid. But for a bricklayer, it's miyat ve'ena makpid. Miyat ve'ena makpid is not a chatzitzah. If it's roiv, so that it's ruba ve'ena makpid. Ruba ve'ena makpid is a chatzitzah. Ois cotton zayin. The Mechaber told us that miyut ve'ena makpid is not a chatzitzah. Says the Mishnah Berurah, when the Mechaber jumps in here, right? What did the Mechaber do? If you look from the beginning of Sif Aleph until now, what did the Mechaber do? The Mechaber said you have to be careful from chatzitzahs, because anything that constitutes a chatzitzah in the world of mikvahs, in the world of tfilas haguf, constitutes a chatzitzah on the hands in the context of the Netillas Yadayim. Then the Mechaber gave me a list of things that could be chatzitzahs. Now the Mechaber comes along and says, Aval, however, b'miyutay she'enoi makbid, when you're dealing with the miyut ve'enoi makbid, ein lachush, you don't have to be concerned, it's not a chatzitzah. What are those words of the Mechaber going back on? Are those words of the Mechaber even going back on the examples that he just gave? Now, the examples that he just gave are examples of miyut umakbid, like tzoya, that's takas hatzipirin, shaloi keneged abasar, right? That's miyut umakbid, so it's a problem. Now the Mechaber says miyut ve'enoi makbid is not a problem. Is he qualifying even the examples that he just gave? So says the Mishnah Berurah, no. Aval din zeh koi al reish hasif. With this phrase, the Mechaber is going back on the very opening salvo of the sif. When the Mechaber said tzarich lizar mechatzitza shekol davar shechaitzis b'tfila chaitzis b'netila, now the Mechaber is qualifying that statement and saying those are chatzitzas. But miyut ve'enoi makbid is not a chatzitzah. So din zeh koi al reish hasif be'etzem din chatzitzah. Dim nimtza shum davar chaitzis al miyut hayad. If you have something that's making an interposition only on a minority of the hand, ve'enoi makbid, and the person is not makbid on it, ein lachush, then you don't have to be concerned. V'das HaTorah, the opinion of the Torah is, da'af be'elu shezachar ha'mechaber mikoidim, even the list that the Mechaber gave, to whom in dvarim shedarka cheroi b'nei adam la'akbid, right? The Mechaber just gave me a list, like tzoya, that's shaloi keneged abasar. The Mechaber said that's a problem. Why? Because it's miyut makbid. The Torah says, mikol makayim imhu einoi makbid einoi chaitzis. So the Torah says that this phrase, aval b'miyutay she'einoi makbid ein lachush, qualifies even the examples. Again, what's the nafkamina? There's two different ways to look at this. I have to dial down the intensity, otherwise I lose my voice. Not easy for me to do. That's not my style. Takes me out of my comfort zone. So again, there's two different ways that we could look at this. The Mechaber gave me a list of items that he said are a chatzitzah. Let's take one, for example. Tzaya shatachas hatzipirin, dirt that's under the fingernail, shaloi keneged habasar, where the fingernail protrudes beyond the fingertip. Okay, that is a chatzitzah, says the Mechaber. Why? Because even though it's miyut, even though it's only on a very small portion of the hand, it's only dirt under, let's say, one fingernail, but it's makbid. And miyut umakbid makes a chatzitzah. Now, the Mechaber comes along and says, you should know, miyut ve'enoi makbid is not a chatzitzah. So now, let's say I'm a person who has long fingernails and doesn't care if I have dirt under the long fingernails. I'm not makbid. I'm not a clean freak. I'm not so persnickety, Or you could be talking with somebody who's a little slovenly. It's just the way he is. He's not so makbid on these things. So for him, is that a chatzitzah? By him, maybe it's miyut ve'enoi makbid. So that's going to depend how you understand this Mechaber. When the Mechaber said, Avo b'miyutay she'enoi makbid ein lachush, is he qualifying everything he said until this point? So he's qualifying even the examples that he gave, and he's telling you, tzaya shetachas hatzipirin shaloi keneged habasar is a problem by most people because it's a miyut umakbid. But if you have somebody for whom it's miyut ve'enoi makbid, then it's not a problem. Or maybe no. Maybe the examples that the Mechaber gave, those are ironclad. Tzayat shetachas tziparin shaloi kedeged habasar is a problem. Why? Because it's miyut makbid. I have a slovenly person who's not makbid, but l'daita it's a koladam. Just because he is that way, that's not the norm, and we go by the norm. When the Mechaber said Aval b'miyut she'er makbid in lachush, he was going back on the first sentence of the Siman. He said, there's such a thing as chatzitzah. You have to be careful of chatzitzah. Why? Because shekal davar shechaitzis b'tfila chaitzis b'netila, but not something that's miyut ve'ena makbid. So the Mishnah Berurah tells me, the Mishnah Berurah says that no, it was going back on the beginning of the sif. It was going back in the beginning of the sif. Everything else is ironclad. Now, says the Mishnah Berurah, but the Torah doesn't learn that way. For das HaTorah, it's the opinion of the Torah, da'af be'elu shazachar mechaber. Even by the cases that the mechaber gave, like the dirt under the fingernail, to whom idvarim shedarket sharoi b'nei adam lahakbid, where most people this is miyut umakbid and it's a problem. Mikamokim im hu eina makbid. If you have somebody who's not makbid, eina chaitzis. For him, it's not a chatzitzah. Aval das Magen Avram ushari achrayim, but it's the opinion of the Magen Avram and other achrayim to bechol elu shezakar mechaber lo yazlinan basrei kiyam basarei b'nei adam. The opinion of the Magen Avram and the other achrayim is that you don't go by the individual person. You go by roiv b'nei adam. So even if you have a slovenly individual who's taka not makbid, it doesn't matter. Since most of the world is makbid, this constitutes miyut makbid, and it's a problem. Remember, if you're talking about a chatzitzah on the majority of the hand, ruba the ena makbid does constitute a chatzitzah. Okay, we're going to stop over here. We'll continue next time with the words of the Ramah. Thank you so much for joining me for limud HaTorah. Discuss of limud HaTorah should be making against Klal Yisrael. The Baruch Hashem should send Yeshua's refuahs parnassus shituchim to all those in need. Achenu kol beis Yisrael and Asunim Atzaru b'Ashivya. Hamakim Yerachem Aleim v'Yitziyim Yitzaru Lavacha me'afelu la'orim Yishibud l'Geula Hashta b'Gala Zman Kariv v'Noimar Amen. The Baruch Hashem should have Rachmanis on everybody who's in harm's way. The Baruch Hashem should have Rachmanis on Gans Klal Yisrael. The Baruch Hashem should send not a temporary Yeshua to this crisis, because there is no real Yeshua to this crisis. No matter what all the talking heads and the professionals and everything say, there's no true end game that solves the problem. There's only one end game that solves the problem, and that is Bias Mashiach Tzidkenu B'meher v'yameinu Amen. Be well.